I was so anxious that I nearly pulled out of my interview. And I think if someone had been there to be like, it's normal, like people who are successful in their interviews were so anxious beforehand. It's not a reflection of how well you're going to do. I think that'll be my main message that it's really scary, but that's normal. And if you're not being pushed, if you expect to be pushed and you expect to be challenged, that will be a good mindset to have. But also don't expect that it's so hard and you can't do it, because if you are intelligent enough to have applied to Cambridge and to have got to the interview stage, you're obviously intellectually able.
Hello everyone, welcome to Cambridge from the Inside. We're having a new guest today. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Rosalind. I'm a first year Psychological and Behavioural Sciences student at Trinity Hall and very excited to be here.
Nice. And we're going to be talking about interviews advice for students who are applying for Psychological Behavioural Sciences, PBS. So to get into it, when you had your interview invitation, how did you prepare for your PBS interviews?
I think there were different focus areas that I prepared. So by that I mean things like technique, mindset and sort of stress management, and then obviously the content itself. So I'll start with content because that's the easiest to explain. I went through my personal statement and I sort of coded it. If you're doing psychology, you might be aware of what that means, but I went through and I identified the key themes in my interview. So I had things like consciousness, like the concept of consciousness. Yeah. I think I talked about emotion. I talked a little about language because that was what I did my EPQ on. And then I went and I annotated my personal statement with other ideas I had related to those codes. In terms of, I know we're going to talk about this a bit more later, but in terms of sort of technique, I basically just practiced as much as I could, talking through problems with people and finding different ways to work it out and having people sort of like challenge me on things I thought. I was sort of going around being like, argue with me about psychology, please, to everyone I knew. Yeah. And then in terms of mindset, it was sort of thinking of it not necessarily as a test, but really practicing really trying to remain aware of the fact that it was just an opportunity to talk about psychology. And I think that was one of the most helpful things I did in my preparation, was reframing the idea of the interview, not as something that's necessarily scary or a test or a challenge to your intellectual ability, but more as an opportunity to talk about something you're really interested in with someone who's at the top of that field.
Yeah. Oh, nice. That sounds really cool and really good that you're able to change perspective on that. Sounds like you're really good on your mindset approaching the interviews, which is appropriate for applying for psychology. So to go on how you prepared for the interviews, did you need to do any reading beforehand, or was it a situation where you can kind of go in and see how the interview went without knowing a lot of psychology beforehand, etc.?
I think they're not, when you say do you need to do reading, there is no specific reading. They're not going to get you into the interview and go, you don't know the specific principles of behaviourism, you never get into Cambridge, we don't want you here. What they do want to see is an interest in the subject. So your knowledge doesn't have to be specific things you think will get you into Cambridge, and having that I need to do this to get me into Cambridge mindset isn't going to make your application fun. It's probably not going to make your application very good either. What I found was that reading things that interested me. So I read a lot about cognitive neuroscience and processing of emotion based on somatic signals, because that's just what I'm interested in. So they don't expect you to have any knowledge beyond what you do at A-level, but they do expect you, any specific knowledge. They do expect you to have knowledge of things that you can talk about to show that you've engaged with the subject beyond just your A-levels.
Nice. Yeah, that does sound quite consistent with other subjects, in that they're not assessing how much you know, but how you use what you know in different situations. You were talking about going over your personal statement before the interview. Was your personal statement brought up in the interviews?
Yeah, I think obviously I can't tell you specifically what I was
Yeah.
asked because
Yeah,
they
yeah.
keep the interview questions sort of under wraps. But I'd say it was like sort of the questions towards the beginning, just trying to ascertain how well I've understood the content on my personal statement. But it wasn't, they didn't go through and go, right, you said this, back it up, cite me a source.
Yeah.
It was definitely just getting you into the interview, getting you into talking about
Yeah.
psychology.
So would you definitely say in order to not be thrown off, like applicants should at least like just double check what they've said
Oh,
over?
yeah. I think the best advice I got was anything on your personal statement is fair game. So make sure you're prepared to talk about it. And that's why I think annotating my personal statement was really helpful. I mean, also because what I put on my personal statement was what I was most interested in. But because it meant that when I did get one or two questions about the content I put on there, I was confident and I wasn't going, oh, when did I write that? What was I writing about? Why was I putting that on there? So you really should be confident on your personal statement content, at least in my experience.
Nice. Yeah, I think it's really good advice. So I think like interviews are quite unique in that students up until this point aren't normally like assessed like through conversations, normally through exams. But how did you navigate or prepare for the conversational side
Oh,
of the interview?
I think this is probably the most difficult. I was so anxious about my interview.
Mm.
And I think we're going to talk a bit about anxiety management a bit later.
Yeah.
But in terms of just prepping for the academic side of the interview, what I did was my psychology teacher had printed me out some sample questions. So I went through them just with a friend and I was
Yeah.
like, can you try and, pick holes in my arguments, just get me used to talking through these things. I had one practice interview with a psychologist organised by the school. And then I had a friend who was a teacher, like a family friend, who sort of talked through some interview questions with me, which was really helpful as well. I'd say there wasn't much difference with like a specific psychologist and someone who just understood how to talk to people. So don't pressure yourself too much if you can't find a psychology professional to interview you. And I think that goes for any subject as well. It's more about the skill of articulating your ideas. And I think, honestly, if you do a practice interview with someone who isn't in your subject, but you can still explain your ideas and interest them in the subject, that might be better practice, because then you're learning how to articulate your ideas in a different domain to what you're used to. I think the most important thing was just coming at things from a variety of angles. Every single practice interview I did, the people picked out different things from my personal statement or from the practice questions to each other. So that did mean I got like a variety of experience in talking about psychology. But yeah, I'd say just anyone you can find who's willing to interview you, even like your mum or your dad, if you've got a set of practice interview questions, just so that you can get used to talking out loud rather than, because in an exam you can go back and edit things. Whereas when you're in an interview, if you say something wrong, you can go back and say, oh no, that's wrong, let me correct it. But it can be quite anxiety inducing because there feels like there's some pressure to get everything right, which there isn't. But yeah, having that practice does make it a little bit less terrifying.
Because you've like it sounds obvious, but just if you've practiced, then once you come to the interview, those kind of like hurdles and pitfalls you would have experienced them during a practice, so then in the interview you're less likely to go through that. You're mentioning about going over practice questions. Do you remember any of the ones that you went over?
I think I can't remember because my teacher basically found them on a website. I can't remember where it was, but I do remember there was one about why it was talking about IQ and birth order and trying to explain. It was basically getting at the nature-nurture problem. It was like, why might this happen? Why might it be that children with high IQ tend to be the first children? So then you'd sort of answer. And then there's a follow-up. I think underneath it had, what if, as a challenge, what if it showed that the same effect was not found with only children? And then talk about sort of, I can't remember what the answer was, but it was basically challenging you to think, maybe the student says, oh, it's biological because parents are younger, might be better conditions for conceiving a child. Or they might say, it's this isn't endorsed by me saying this is the truth, by the way.
Yeah,
I genuinely can't remember what the answer was. It might be, you know, like a nurture thing when the parents have more time for the first child. And then, you know, that challenge with only children just forces you to think, what are the other things that can influence IQ or behaviour? So I think that's probably quite a good example of the fact they don't expect you to know content, they don't expect you to know what IQ is, how it's measured, but they do expect you to know sort of the basic debates in psychology. And can you bring that in to analyse an unfamiliar question? So I think that probably sticks out to me because it was the most useful in sort of getting a feel for what they're expecting of you.
Yeah. Am I right in thinking if you weren't to know like specific debates in the area, but you're approached with like a question like that, it would be encouraged for the interviewee to evaluate like the situation themselves and see what they think? Is that the kind of thing you'd be doing in an interview?
Yeah. So if you don't know the content they're asking you about the interview, that is not the end of the world. I think you can, obviously it's great if you can apply some actual knowledge to a situation, but again, they're testing your intellectual ability. So if you are able to talk around it and say, oh, from, you know, this study, I do know this, and I can bring that in, even if I don't know the specific debate we're getting at. I think obviously it is best to have an idea of the debate's sort of key themes in psychology. But if you do get something in your interview and they say, and you have like no clue about it whatsoever, it's not the end of the world. And if you sort of stay calm and think through logically and also based on, you know, your general psychology knowledge, it's very doable to talk about something you have no clue about.
Definitely. I mean, that's two really good points you highlighted there. I remember I was talking to Marcus recently, and he was saying that sometimes knowing too much, when someone knows a lot, they would refer to different people's opinions and theories, which is great, but then can prevent them from saying what their own opinion is and just being able to do both and know when it's appropriate, which to do and what the interviewer is asking of you as well, whether they want you to cite something or have your own opinion.
I mean, they will challenge you. I do remember I had one, again, I can't tell you exactly what happened, but basically I was presented with a problem and he said, basically these factors which would disqualify the explanation I would have given based on the theory were in place. So I was going to say something about nurture. He basically said it wasn't a nurture situation. And I think I did actually say out loud, that challenges my initial assumption, and therefore I will think through these things. So if you are shocked or you are challenged by something, you can say that out loud in the interview. And I don't know if that was a good thing to do, but I'm here, so it couldn't have been that bad.
I suppose for anyone who's watching, because who's like using the terms of nature and nurture and unsure how to define the difference between, how do you define the difference between nature and nurture?
To put it the most simplistically, nature are things that are sort of, we say, like hardwired, so genetic or genetic underlying factors. So the inheritance of the X chromosome, you know, it's in my nature to be biologically female. Whereas nurture are things that influence you from the environment. So, for example, you learn things, or you can have experience like cause biological changes. But just the most simplistic way, we'll talk about learning things. So, for example, I might present myself in a certain way because I've learned that gets me taken more seriously in an academic setting. So nature is sort of innate and nurture is experiential, if that's probably the simplest way I can put it.
Okay, nice. And I don't want to go too much off topic, but now that we're on the topic, in like contemporary psychology now, like is there I genuinely don't know. I'm quite curious to know that. Is there a distinct difference between the two, or is there a bit of a blurry line? Because it's just trying to see where the boundary is between the two.
I think I am in my first term of my undergraduate, so I'm not an authority on anything ever really. But the idea I got from A-level psychology was they're a lot more interlinked, and people tend to understand that nature versus nurture isn't really what we're talking about anymore. It's what extent is it nature, to what extent is it nurture.
So do you think it'd be like a fair game question for an interviewer to ask like a student, like what they think of nature and nurture and the
Yeah,
differences?
I mean, especially if they've put that on their personal statement, or that's just
Yeah.
like the topic
Yeah.
that the interview's going on. But yeah, again, like a general awareness of issues and understanding of psychology will get you quite far. So you can bring those things in.
Nice. Yeah, we have no idea. So just just I guess I should have said this right at the start. We haven't spoken to anyone about what the interviews are going to be like this year
Okay.
or previous interviews in the previous years.
Well, obviously, I can't tell you specifics about previous interviews.
Yeah.
I'll get in trouble for that.
Well, just if anyone doesn't know, interviewers they do change the interviews year after year, and each interviewer for each subject across all the colleges will do that in their own way. But so what if you know someone who applied for the subjects that you're applying for the same college, the interview that they might have had last year will be different to the one that you have this year. Just for any of the viewers who didn't know that. So I know when we were preparing for the podcast, you were talking about that having a bit of graph skills would be useful. I was wondering if you can expand on that.
Yeah, I think being able to analyze data is something that's really important in psychology.
Yeah.
So I have seen in like sample interview questions, that is something that does sometimes come up. They'll show you a data set and they'll say, what does this tell us about behavior? Again, I can't tell you what they did in my interview, but it was relevant being able to sort of speak confidently on data. And I think that sort of goes without saying for most science subjects, but with psychology, I think people do get caught up in learning theories that they forget that it is necessary to have a foundational understanding of how to do science. So especially if you're not coming from doing A-level psychology, just know that graphs and data analysis are relevant to psychology, and that might be something you're asked about in the interview. So being able to insightfully interpret data sets or a graph or something to tell you something about behavior.
Yeah, so how is that something that like you would practice from like one of your A-levels, or would you like look up data online to prepare for that?
I think I mostly practiced, because I did A-level biology.
Nice, yeah.
So I did mostly practice by using the examples in my A-level biology book and being sure that I could explain, correlations, causations. And also the research methods section of psychology A-level I found was quite helpful.
Yeah.
So you do a lot of critiquing, sort of, we can't make an assumption based on this because it's correlational, or the sample size is really low, or it's not a longitudinal study. So those sort of basics of research methods. Again, nothing fancy. You don't need to know exactly details of why this graph might be used, but if you have a general understanding of how a psychologist might use data, that might be something that's helpful.
Nice, yeah, I think that's really good advice. And definitely can help with the anxiety if you were to be shown a graph and you weren't expecting to deal with that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You don't want to be caught off guard by forgetting that psychology uses data.
So I know you've already talked a lot about your practice interviews, but one thing I just wanted to ask, when you're doing practice interviews, is there something like, and if someone who wants to do practice interviews but weren't able to find like a psychology teacher or a psychologist, do you think there's something to gain from actually practicing an interview or a conversation with someone who doesn't know so much about the subject, because then it means you have to explain the ideas a bit more thoroughly?
Yeah, absolutely. I think any opportunity you can get through to talk through ideas. I think I had one where I did just send my personal statement to a friend, and she went through, and I think she asked me a lot about philosophy because she did humanities.
Okay.
Like that's what her degree was in. So she just sort of asked me, these things are relevant to what I know, link psychology to them, I think was the gist of it. But I wouldn't worry about finding a psychologist. I think it's definitely helpful. It's definitely, and it can make you feel more confident if you've already spoken to someone who knows what they're talking about. But I think any opportunity you can get to talk to people about what's on your personal statement or about general ideas is just practice for that articulation and critical thinking that you'll need in the interview.
Yeah, no matter who you're talking to.
Yeah.
Yeah, just being able to practice the talking. You don't want your first conversation to be in
You
the
do,
interview.
you do not want your first interview experience to be with the supervisor, not supervisor, the interviewer.
Yeah.
The last thing you want is to go into it and being like, I'm really good at exams, I'm really good at maths, whatever, but I've never spoken to anyone in person about psychology. So even if it's just, in the common room at school, hand your personal statement to someone and go, ask me things about psychology. You just want to be confident talking. You don't have to be a perfect interviewee, but you want to know how you would articulate an idea verbally rather than written.
Yeah, even if you're talking to yourself out loud. I know a lot of people who would do that, whether to like a voice recorder on their phone.
Listen to yourself back and see how articulate you are.
Yeah. So with regards to your interviews last year, what were they like? How many interviews were there? If there were more than one interview, were you interviewed by different people, etc.?
I had 2 interviews.
Yeah.
My interview was at 9 o'clock in the morning as well, I think. So I think I was possibly the first one of the day.
Yeah.
So I just got to school. And I had one with 2 people who weren't from my subject, I think. I had one with, I think it was an evolutionary biologist.
Okay.
So it was sort of like non-subject specific, testing your general ability, I think, was the idea behind that. And then I had one, and then again, it was 2 people who were both my supervisors now. So that was more subject specific.
Nice. And like, what was the experience like? Like, tell me more about your interviews. Like, what?
So mine were virtual interviews, which I thought was
yeah.
quite nice because I got to do it. I think I did it in my headmaster's study, which
Nice.
was where I'd done all of my prep. So
Nice.
if you do get a virtual interview, that is really good because you can do it in a familiar place, somewhere where you feel comfortable and confident. And I had a bit of a break in between, so I think I went to my biology lesson.
Yeah.
Because I didn't really know what to do for the half an hour between my 2 interviews.
Right.
So I just went and sat in the back of biology and went through my flashcards.
Nice.
So I'd say it was quite laid back, although it does depend because, so I came out of it, I was like, that was quite interesting. I mean, it was quite a good conversation. Then I also had friends who came out and they were like, oh, I got grilled. It was really, really difficult. So I think it definitely varies.
Yeah.
I think the main thing with interview structure and interview difficulty is they're not allowed to make it easier or harder for people. So if it's really difficult for you, that's because that interviewer, their style is to challenge you and to make you think. Whereas, my interviewer's style might have been to have a discussion and to elicit ideas. So the difficulty and the level of challenge in the interview is more a reflection of the interviewer's interviewing style, as opposed to your ability and how they're judging you. So that's definitely not something to worry about if one person says that was easy, the other says that was hard. It's probably just because the way you were interviewed was slightly different, and neither way's better than another as well.
Yeah.
In terms of, I think that's probably everything I want to cover with the structure.
Nice.
But I did want to put that little note in there. Every subject, every college will do it differently.
Yeah.
So I think my friend was doing medicine at CATS, which is completely different from Trinity Hall psychology.
Yeah.
So the way it was done was
Gonna be different.
very different.
Nice. And it's a really common phenomenon that it's really hard to know how your interview went. If you thought it was really difficult and it went really badly. There's a lot of people who felt like that, but then got an offer. I think the interviews are there to challenge you, and so I think if you felt like it was very challenging, that's a normal outcome.
I thought mine went awfully. I will say, I think this is probably quite a useful anecdote to know in terms of you don't have to get everything right. I was asked a very basic level terminology question for A-level biology, which I got completely wrong. And then I had to say, I don't know, after I got it wrong 3 times. And he told me, and it was basic biology. I think I can say that, right?
You can
that's
say
not
that.
specific.
Yeah, that's fine.
That's not too specific. So you can get a knowledge question completely flat out wrong. And as long as you're sort of humble enough to say, I've forgotten, it's an unfamiliar situation. They don't care if you're if you're doing your A-level biology flashcards. They care if you're able to talk about
exactly.
Talk about your subject. But I did think my interview had gone awfully because of a few little things like that, but they're not what they're focusing on.
It's not a test of recall at all. I can imagine from the interviewer's perspective in that moment, they're probably stressed that they're going to get stressed that they didn't know this thing that was supposed that
It's like,
wasn't what they're
that was just an orienting question. You don't need to be panicking. But yeah,
because what they probably really want to talk about is the stuff after that. So definitely wouldn't get too stressed about that. One thing I did want to ask was, a lot of people say that interviews that are very similar to supervisions once they start studying at Cambridge. Is that the case? Like, are interviews there to mirror the supervisions?
I think, okay, I'd say first of all, thinking of it like a supervision, or, you know, something that you might be more familiar with, would be like a lesson or a tutoring session is a really, really helpful mindset to have, because they do want to know that you're teachable. I think from my perspective, I say it is quite similar, although the people that interviewed me are now my supervisors, so I don't know if that's just because of their method of asking questions. But in terms of the fact that you do some learning, then go and discuss that learning, you are challenged on a few things, you learn, you maybe learn a new skill in terms of interpreting a graph or talking about study design. I think it definitely is like a supervision. I think the way in which it differs from a supervision is, obviously in a supervision they want to know to some extent, have you understood the specific content, whereas they're testing for potential in the interview rather than, because I think if you went to a supervision and the supervisor asked you like, how did you find the lecture, and you go, oh, I didn't pay attention, I have no idea, that would be more of an issue than in an interview if they asked you a question, you said, oh, I don't really have a knowledge base for that.
That's a good point.
So yeah, I'd say definitely similarity, definitely look at it as a learning opportunity and as an opportunity to interrogate ideas, but it's not exactly the same, because they're more testing for your potential and your ability to maybe do well in a future supervision, rather than how well you've understood a certain set of content.
Exactly that. And I think the first thing you said, that they're wanting to see how teachable you are, really does encapsulate.
It's definitely about how teachable you are.
Yeah, exactly. Nice. Well, was there any other advice you had before we finish off?
Yeah, I think my advice is mostly, I think if I had to give one bit of advice, it would be, don't overthink it. And I think people think a lot about the academic side, and one thing that people don't emphasize as much is looking after yourself and making sure that you're feeling okay about the interview. I remember being really stressed about my interview. I nearly didn't go through with it because I was that anxious. And I think my main advice would be that, obviously, if you've got an interview, if you've put all the work in to apply to Cambridge, you've got the grade so that your school is confident that you can apply to Cambridge. I'm not saying you don't need to be stressed. Obviously, you need to take it seriously, but you are obviously intellectually capable. You are obviously equipped to do it, and making sure that you can manage that stress and sort of maintain your confidence in yourself through the interview process would be the biggest bit of advice I have. I think if you're getting an interview at Cambridge, you have so much potential to do well academically, and you don't want to let fear of failure or fear of being rejected hold you back. So really I don't want to say don't stress, because that never helps as advice, but you don't need to be as stressed as I'm sure if you're doing the interview process, you are. And it's very doable, and good luck.
Nice. So you're saying that focusing on like your health, well-being, and being able to perform, and trusting that the academic side you'd be able to handle academically, but just
don't burn yourself out over the interview. Don't be up till 1 a.m. reviewing specific theories of psychology. Review what you know, what you're interested in. Make sure you're confident in talking to it, and it is just an opportunity for you as someone who loves and is interested in psychology to talk with people who are sort of at the top of their field, or and are equally interested in psychology. It's not a test. They're not judging you. They probably don't have time to really judge you as a person. It's just a conversation, and I think there's no need to burn yourself out, and looking after your well-being will do infinitely more for your performance and your confidence on the day than knowing everything there is to possibly know about psychology.
Nice. Thank you so much, Rosalind.
Thank you so much for your time.
Really interesting podcast for PBS interviews advice. We're hoping to do more podcasts on interviews advice, going through as many of the subjects as we can before the interview season ends this year. Let us know if you have any questions in the comment section, and we'll see you guys next time. Oh, how was that?
That was good.
Oh, yeah, I thought it was really good.
Yeah. Sort of lost my train of thought when I was talking about anxiety. I was like, that's ironic.